Welcome, students. This is part one of the Protestant Reformation Notes. This is going to focus on Luther and Henry VIII. If you're looking for part two, that'll be a different section. This is going to be on 17.3. We're going to focus on the key individuals of Luther and Henry VIII. If you're interested in what leads up to this movement, you can read 17.3, but we're going to focus just on Luther and Henry VIII. Protestant Reformation, Luther's beginnings. You don't need to write this down because it's italicized, but Luther was born in Esbjerg, which is part of the Holy Roman Empire, to peasant parents in 1483. That's in Germany. He studied to be a lawyer, but felt conviction to please God. So he will enter a monastery as a monk versus focusing on law. He became a monk and was known for attempts to please God. You should write that down. He became a monk and wanted to please God. You can see him right there in his monk attire, shaving his head at the top and wearing his monk attire. He taught New Testament at the University of Wittenberg and found the just shall live by faith, which is in Romans, the gospel of or the epistle of the Romans. And so you should write that down. The just shall live by faith. That's really the turning point in his faith journey. He would post the 95 Theses on the Wittenberg door on October 31st, 1517. So before Halloween was Halloween, it was Reformation Day. You can see him there pointing to his 95 Theses. Now, this was a common thing to do anytime that you wanted to debate something or alert people's attention to something. You would post it on the Wittenberg church door, and so that's what he was doing at first. People didn't notice that much, pay much attention, but it's when he started to really debate those issues that it got traction. This posting of the 95 Thesis was mainly to challenge the sale of indulgences, which was sold by a German priest named Tetzel. He's the one who came up with this idea that you did not have to spend time in purgatory. You could go straight to heaven if you bought these indulgences, and that you could buy them for other people that had died as well. And this was all done to build St. Peter's Basilica, to rebuild it, refurbish it. Michelangelo would be assigned to help with the building of that. And so, picture of Tetzel right there. Martin Luther felt like this went against the gospel, especially when he read that section in Romans. So he wrote several pamphlets attacking the Roman Catholic Church's corruption. You don't need to write that down. His three pillars were really justification by faith alone, authority of Scripture, and the priesthood of all believers, not just the focus on the priests being the ones who were God's favored, but that all believers are priests, not just a select group. So those were his main focus there. Justification by faith, that these indulgences couldn't justify you, but it's only faith in Jesus Christ's work on the cross, and that Scripture alone, not the Pope or a priest like Tetzel, could have authority in church doctrine, but it comes from Scripture. Despite changes, Luther still held to many of the Roman Catholic practices, such as infant baptism. So you see here that Luther really wasn't trying to separate from the Catholic Church. He was just trying to reform it. But oftentimes when you try to reform, there is a separation that happens. Much like with the American Patriots during the precursor of the American Revolution, there was those attempts to appeal to the king and to Parliament, and not to fully separate, but by 1776 the American Patriots would have to separate. That's very similar to Martin Luther here. In 1519, Luther debates John Eck. You don't need to write that down, but that would be the start of the big stir regarding his points against the church. Following the debate with Eck, in 1520, a papal bull was issued against Luther. So they start to call him out as a heretic. The Catholic Church did. In 1521, you need to write this down, Luther is called before the Diet of Worms and told to recant. And so he would be brought before this council, and they ask him to recant. And there's a great scene from the movie Luther that came out in the early 2000s where he really starts to debate those issues. And this is the moment where he does not recant. And so because he refuses to recant, he is excommunicated and made an outlaw. So that's important to note, that he would not recant and that the church would excommunicate him. Luther would be kidnapped and goes into hiding at Wartburg Castle. So the Catholic Church was getting ready to execute him as a martyr. But he was kidnapped by people that appreciated his works and believed in his teachings, that Scripture and faith alone were the focus. And so he would be brought to the Wartburg Castle. And he would do probably his most important achievement in history, which is to translate the New Testament into German. Because remember that the Bible was in Latin, and very few people could read Latin. And so the church had a control on what the Bible taught. And so once you could put it into the people's language, just like John Wycliffe would do in England, he would bring it into English. Martin Luther would bring the New Testament into German language in Germany. And so that's very important, so that the people could see for themselves that his message of justification alone and his message of Scripture alone was important, and that the papal Rome was wrong in many of their practices. So that was important there. Picture of his study. So what are his legacies? Well, the translation of the Bible into German is pretty important, as we looked at before. You don't need to rewrite that, though. That's why it's italicized. The Peasants' Revolt, resulting in the death of 100,000 peasants. So the unfortunate consequence is that many peasants start to revolt against the rich because they feel that the rich and the powerful, the church, has been manipulating things and controlling things, and so there's this violence that results in that. And Luther was not happy with that revolt that took place, but there would be much death and bloodshed that stirs because of his theology. He initiates the Protestant Reformation, so he's kind of the catalyst, if you will. The Augsburg Confession, which was written by a different individual, but it was really outlining Luther's beliefs. And so you would have people like Melanchthon and others that would outline Luther's beliefs that he had started. You'll also have the Peace of Augsburg, which will be the official split from German princes from the Roman Catholic Church. And so you'll have those German princes that will start to realize that they can have political power apart from the Roman Catholic Church in believing Luther's doctrine, that it's God who rules, not the church. And so there's kind of this power play that happens that has its pros and cons too. This also inspires other movements that we'll see in a moment. So Luther, he's an important individual. Many other individuals and martyrs had challenged the Catholic Church before, like John Huss had challenged the fact that there were 3 popes at one time that all disagreed with each other. You also have John Wycliffe saying that the Bible should be in the vernacular, the people's language. But it was really Martin Luther that started this larger movement that would inspire others. Along with the Peasants' Revolt, there would also be another unintended consequence to Luther's legacy, and that would be the 30 Years' War. And that is where the German princes were fighting against the Roman Catholic Church for independence. This is more of a political move versus a religious move. Luther wanted religious separation from the Catholic Church, but the German princes will take this a step further and have political separation from the Catholic Church. And this will result in about 50% or more deaths in certain communities in Germany. So the Reformation in England. Henry VIII will be titled the Defender of the Faith. He actually will be a denouncer of Luther. He'll follow the Catholic Church in England and denounce Luther. Picture of Henry VIII right there in his finery. Definitely a Renaissance man of sorts. Henry VIII, however, desired a male heir to maintain his Tudor line, the Tudors, and seek a divorce. However, the Catholic Church will not approve of his divorce, and so he will then break from the Catholic Church as Luther had done. However, he was not one who favored Luther. As you see right here, he will try to get a male heir to continue his kingly line through a male heir. If he doesn't have a male heir, he would have a civil war on his hands because other males would try to compete for his crown if he died. So he would attempt 6 times to have a male heir and fail each time. His first divorce was with Catherine of Aragon. Then he would marry Anne Boleyn. However, he would execute her instead of divorcing her as well because she does not give him a male heir. Then you have Jane Seymour, who will die in childbirth and not give him a son either. You also have Anne of Cleves, who he will divorce, and then you will have Catherine Howard, who he will execute as well, and then Catherine Parr will be widowed. Catherine will be able to outlast his kingship and such. The Pope refused divorce. Henry marries anyway, and so in 1534, Henry VIII accepted as head of England's church. This is known as the Act of Supremacy, and so he will become the head of England's church as he gets that divorce and separates from the Catholic Church. So when does it become the Anglican Church? Edward VI continues reforms, but stalled by Mary I. This will be known as Bloody Mary because she will try to revert back to Catholicism in England and undo what Henry VIII had done. She will murder many Protestants. The Anglican Church, however, or the Church of England, would be established by Elizabeth I in 1559. So it's really not Henry VIII that starts the Anglican Church or the Church of England. It's really Elizabeth I. As you see a picture of her right here, a very important queen in history, one of the most important queens, and we'll look at more of her later on. But the Anglican Church demonstrated Protestant and Catholic influences. So much like the other reform groups, there's not going to be a total break from the Catholic Church, but a partial break.